So, today we're going to do something really cool. We're going to unearth a lost chapter of political history, and it all comes from this one groundbreaking book, Hindu Polity.
All right, let's kick things off with a simple question. If I asked you, where did democracy begin? What's the first thing that pops into your head? I bet for most of you, it's ancient Greece, right? Athens. You know, the agora, the big assemblies, that whole idea of citizen rule. It's the story we all learn in school.
But what if that's not the whole story? What if there's a huge piece of the puzzle missing? Like, what if thousands of miles away from Athens, a completely different and maybe even older tradition of self-governance was thriving? A forgotten chapter just sitting there hidden in plain sight in some of the world's oldest texts.
And that's where our story really begins. Think of it like a detective mission. Because back in the early 20th century, one scholar went on a quest to prove that India's political history was way more complex and way more democratic than anyone gave it credit for.
Okay, so here's our main piece of evidence. This book right here, Hindu Polity, by a guy named Prasad JAISWAL. And you gotta understand, he wasn't just some dusty academic. He was basically an advocate, using rock-solid research to push back against the story everyone was being told at the time. He just knew the evidence for a totally different ancient India was out there, if someone just bothered to look for it.
And he says it himself, right in the preface of the book. He basically says, look, there was this ancient path, shown in the old books, and people forgot about it for a long, long time. That path had to be rediscovered. I mean, think about that. He's saying his life's work is to find this lost way. For his time, that was a huge, almost revolutionary thing to say.
So, if you're a historical detective like JAISWAL, where do you even start looking? Well, he went right back to the beginning. He started digging into India's oldest sacred texts, the Vedas. But here's the cool part. He wasn't reading them for the religious stuff. He was scanning them for clues, for hints about power, about government, and about whether the people had a voice.
And boom, he finds his first big clue. A word, samiti. The texts describe this thing as a sovereign national assembly, and the power it had was, well, immense. This wasn't just a casual get-together. This was the nation meeting, and its number one job? To elect the king. And, this is the really critical part, to re-elect him. That means a king couldn't just rule forever. His power came directly from the people.
But wait, there's more. He didn't just find one body. He found another one working right alongside it. It was called the Sabha. The Vedas even have this beautiful poetic line calling the Sabha and Samiti two sisters. The Sabha was different though. It was smaller, a standing council of elders, the wise ones, and its job was to act as a national court and advise the king.
So let's break that down. You have the Samiti, that's everybody, the voice of the people, with the ultimate power to pick the leader. Then you have the Sabha, that's the select few, the experts, handling law and order. You see what's happening here? It's a system of checks and balances. This is so much more sophisticated than just a simple king telling everyone what to do. Okay, so finding democratic-style groups inside a monarchy, that's already a huge discovery. But JAISWAL's investigation was about to uncover something even more mind-blowing, entire states that ran themselves with no king at all.
He even found the name for them in the old texts, Gana Rajya. Let's look at the word. Gana means a group, or the many. Rajya means rule. So put it together and you get governance by the many. It was literally the ancient Sanskrit word for what we'd call a republic.
And we're not talking about some fringe idea here. JAISWAL found evidence of tons of these Ganarajas that were around for centuries. We're talking about powerful groups like the Lichavis and the Mallas, and here's the big one, the Shakyas. That was the Buddha's own clan. Think about that for a second. The Buddha himself grew up in a republic. So you're probably wondering, how did these things actually work? How do you run a whole state without a king? Well, the details that JAISWAL managed to piece together are honestly just fascinating. It was a surprisingly organized process. First, citizens or their representatives would all meet up in a big assembly hall. Second, they'd debate everything out in the open. We're talking all the big stuff, from going to war to passing new laws. Third, they'd vote. No decrees from on high. They actually voted, sometimes with colored wooden tickets to count everything up. And finally, an elected leader or a council would be in charge of actually getting it done, of carrying out what the assembly decided.
And we know these republics were a big deal because other people talked about them. There's this amazing story about the Buddha. Someone asked him how to conquer the powerful Vajji republic, and the Buddha's advice was, basically, don't even try. He said as long as they keep having their full and frequent public assemblies, they'll prosper. Their strength, he was saying, came from their open, democratic way of doing things.
And just to give you an idea of the sheer scale of this, let's look at the Lichavi Republic. According to the texts, their government was an assembly of, get this, 7,707 elected members. And here's the craziest part, every single one of them had the title Raja, which means ruler. It was like a republic of kings, a huge governing body that shared all the power.
And I want to be clear, this wasn't some simple primitive setup. If you just glance at the table of contents in JAISWAL's book, you can see how deep he went. He's got whole chapters on republican law, on legal procedure, on citizenship, elections, the courts. I mean, he was basically reconstructing an entire lost constitutional history from scratch.
Okay, so why is this so important? Why does digging up this old history actually matter? Well, it's way more than just a cool fun fact. For JAISWAL and for India back in the 1920s, this was about reclaiming their own story.
You have to remember the context. Back then, a big argument for British rule was that India had only ever been ruled by kings and tyrants, that it had no history of self-government. The implication was that Indians just weren't cut out for democracy. And JAISWAL's book, Hindu Polity, was like a scholarly mic drop. It was a direct rebuttal, proving with hard evidence that democratic and republican ideals weren't foreign concepts, they were deeply, deeply rooted in India's own history.
So in the end, what KP JAISWAL did was so much more than just digging up old facts. His detective work showed us that the history we think we know is often just one version of the story. It's shaped by what's been remembered, but also by what's been forgotten. And it kind of leaves you wondering, right? What other stories, what other lost histories are still buried out there, just waiting for someone to find them?